This is a story from my childhood, one of the ones that haunt me to this day. Have you ever seen those memes where it says people react like a criminal when an unexpected visitor arrives on their doorstep? They freeze and drop everything they're doing and throw themselves to the floor to avoid being seen in a window. This is my story of how I became one of those people. At the time, I must have been around maybe 7.5. I was visiting the Midwest, Kansas to be exact, from South Korea, where I was born and raised, just visiting family, nothing major. On that particular night, the adults, our aunt and uncle and our parents, were going to have a date night. So our parents had ordered us pizza before they left and waited for it to arrive, so that we wouldn't have to open the door for anyone. My aunt and uncle had 2 kids, 2 boys to be exact, and they were ages 15 and 8. Like I said before, I was maybe 7 at the time. My older sister was 11, and our baby brother was the young, tender age of 3. So all in all, we're ready to just have a night of fun games. After all, it wasn't often the cousins got to get together like this. They lived in the States, and we lived in Korea, but we loved each other dearly. We saw our parents out at the garage entryway. They made sure we knew the rules, and we could recite them back to them. They also made sure we knew where the telephones were, and the emergency numbers to accompany them. It was just going to be a typical night of no parents, or so we thought. It had maybe been an hour, maybe 2 after our parents had left. We were downstairs in the basement in the playroom, or the game room, whatever people like to call it these days. We were down there just watching movies, playing air hockey, things of that nature, just being kids. We weren't being loud or anything like that, and even if we were, it wouldn't be too big of a deal. Because of the way houses were in Kansas, the basements are built into the ground in case of a tornado. I'd gone upstairs with my oldest cousin because I wanted a drink of chocolate milk and I couldn't reach the cups alone. So we wandered upstairs into the kitchen on the far side of the house, while the others stayed downstairs continuing their games. We'd maybe been upstairs for 15 to 20 minutes because while I was drinking my milk, my older cousin was making snacks since we were planning to watch a movie. Then, all of a sudden, we hear the doorbell ring. I remember my cousin looked at me and told me to stay here. It was odd that the doorbell was ringing. It wasn't late, but it certainly wasn't early. And I say this because it was summer. It was around 8 o'clock. My cousin started to creep towards the door quietly. It was unnerving for someone to be ringing the doorbell. We weren't expecting any guests, and the pizza had been delivered before our parents had left for the evening. And before he's even halfway to the door, whoever's on the other side starts rapidly ringing the doorbell over and over. The constant ringing was echoing throughout the house. And by this point, I'd looked over towards the staircase, and I saw our other siblings starting to creep up the stairs, with the exclusion of the baby, who was still asleep in the crib down in the guest room. The oldest of the kids, let's just go ahead and call him James, put his finger to his lips and told us to be quiet to make it seem like no one was home, despite there being lights on. He crept closer to the door as the banging and the ringing on the doorbell continued, and he peeked through the peephole. I'd never seen my cousin look so freaked out. His face drained of colour, and he backed away from the door rapidly and told us all to go downstairs. But of course, we didn't listen. Honestly, we thought he was playing a joke. Maybe it was some of his friends wanting to scare us, since he did cancel his plans that night to stay home and watch all of us kids. My older sister shoved past him and looked through the peephole herself. And for whatever reason, whatever was on the other side of the door made her have the exact same reaction, and she stumbled back from the door just as pale. At the time, I didn't understand what was going on, I don't think any of us, younger kids, really did. But something wasn't right. After a while, whoever was at the door stopped ringing the doorbell, and all was quiet again. It seemed like they gave up. Maybe they thought no one was home. If only we knew how wrong we really were. We all sat in silence for a while after this initially occurred. My other cousin, who I'm just going to call Kyle for the purposes of this story, mustered up the courage to ask his brother James, who was at the door, and why James and my sister were acting so skittish. James told us there was a man wearing dark clothes and seems to be carrying some type of package or large box, but he couldn't see his face. Of course, Kyle, being the little smarty pants he was at the time, started to mock James, saying he was just being a scaredy cat and didn't recognise their neighbours. Kyle was convinced it was just a neighbour trying to drop off a package that might have got mixed up in the mail, because it happened all the time. So we all agree that that was the probable cause, until we realised whoever was ringing the doorbell didn't just leave the package on the porch. Isn't that what most neighbours do? In the case no one answers, they'll just leave it. And why would they try to bring it over to the house at night, instead of just waiting until the next day? But we thought it was over and done with, so we pushed it to the back of our minds. We didn't think it was important to call our parents and let them know. After all, it was over. We went back to the kitchen, grabbed the snacks, and started to head back downstairs, until we heard banging again. But it wasn't from the front porch this time. We were in shock. We froze in fear. I mean, it was now coming from right behind us. We turned slowly and looked back in the direction from which we came from. We were currently standing in the dining room, as we'd already passed through the kitchen. It was like someone was banging on the kitchen window. You know, the one that's typically above the sink, so your mother or father can watch the kids while they play in the backyard. So James and my older sister, who I'm just going to call Nicole at this point, got down on their hands and knees, and they crawled back into the kitchen, much against our charging. Just as quickly as they crawled into the kitchen to take a peek, they crawled back to us, almost in hyper speed, and they told us to get low and stay low as we crawled into the den further down the hallway. James had us all huddle close to the fireplace, out of sight from the windows, and he told us to stay there. He was taking charge. He was protecting his home and family the best he knew how. James quickly crawled away. I didn't know where he was going, but I was scared. The banging was getting louder, and it was getting closer and closer. At some point, I started to cry, and I remember Kyle put his hand over my mouth, and my sister was hugging us tight. And around that time, we saw James starting to appear back around the corner, and he had his baseball bat. He'd crawled up another staircase to get to his room. He crawled past us and put a finger to his lips again, and that's when we realised he was crawling towards the doggy door. He was attempting to close off the one entrance to the house that wasn't locked. Thankfully, he managed to get it latched in time, because we don't think the man outside had realised that the house had a doggy door. But when he heard the lock click into place, the banging became more erratic, more violent. Then, all of a sudden, much like before the banging stopped, we heard pacing. Someone was walking back and forth across the porch, slowly, deliberately. Thump, thump, thump. His heavy boots thundered across the red oak porch. And then, without warning, the pacing stopped, and it became quiet, eerily quiet. Then the man called out, "Won't you open the door? I have a package for you." We didn't respond. We stayed quiet, or as quiet as we could be, with the way our hearts were pounding and how ragged our breathing was. The stranger called out again, "Open the door!" And again, we didn't answer. The man then called out angrily, "I said, open the door. I have a package." Like before, we didn't answer, nor did we make any sudden movements. The man started banging again, this time directly on the panel window of the room we were sitting in. He was yelling, "I know you're in there. I know you can hear me. Open the door, or I'll open it for you." Bang, bang, bang. The windows rattled and shook violently with each impact from the strange man. Thankfully, our cousin's house had reinforced windows, so they weren't easy to break. But unluckily, we didn't have any neighbours close by, so we didn't think anyone could hear the commotion. But while he was making all this noise, we took the opportunity to book it into another room and get to a phone. At one point, while we were on the phone with the police officers, they asked us if we could describe the man. And all we know is that he was tall and wearing black. So Kyle and I decided to be brave, so if something did happen to us that night, they'd at least have a better description of who did it. We crawled back into the den, and we dared to look out of a small corner of the window. We gently moved the curtains out of the way, and lo and behold, the man was still banging. He'd moved the shutters off the outside of the window. They're basically hanging off their hinges at this point, rattling with the wind. We made eye contact with this deranged man. Direct soul-searching eye contact. I don't think before this night I'd ever believed that there's pure evil in the world. But when I looked into that man's eyes, I didn't see a soul. I know it sounds crazy, but those were not the eyes of a human. He was something unlike anything I've ever seen before. Animalistic is maybe the only word I could describe it as, besides demonic. It was evil, unnatural, and something I never want to see ever again. When he saw us, he smiled a twisted grin that I'm sure he thought was reassuring, and he crouched down so he could get a better look at us, I assume. And he said, "Don't you want your mail? You have mail. I can give it to you if only you open the door." I remember just grabbing onto Kyle's hand for dear life, and Kyle shook his head no, and he threw the curtain back over the window. And before we even had a chance to move any further, the man started violently banging on the window again. At this point, James had enough. He passed the phone to my sister, and he yelled, "Leave us alone. The police are on their way. You're not getting in here." After that, it seemed like the man panicked. The banging abruptly stopped, and then we heard rapid footsteps on the porch. And Kyle and I peeked out of the window again, and the man was running through the yard, past all the trees, and he jumped the fence. The wooden 22-foot fence at the end of the yard into the alley that separated the neighbourhood from the old cemetery. We stayed on the phone with police until they arrived, and our parents arrived not long after. But the man was never caught, and we don't know what happened after that night. He just disappeared into thin air. To this day, I'm now 21. Whenever the doorbell rings and I'm not expecting a visitor, my heart drops and I break out into a cold sweat. This happened over 20 years ago. I was driving back home with my girlfriend at the time. It was Christmas Eve, and my mother's family used to hold a large celebration at my aunt's house in Estacada. This was my girlfriend's first time meeting with my extended family, but she got on quite well with them. We spent the majority of the afternoon and evening talking, playing poker, opening presents, and drinking an assortment of adult beverages. My girlfriend was quite inebriated by the time we had to leave, so I'd be driving us home. It was around 11 p.m. or so. I was driving my girlfriend's car along Highway 211. Now, this stretch of road is surrounded by farms and dense patches of forest, and parts of it are unlit. But nothing to fear. I grew up in this area, so I knew this road like the back of my hand. The both of us were just driving and talking away, just two young lovers making the most of our moment together. There's a portion of the highway that descends down an enormous hill before crossing Deep Creek. Surrounding both sides of the road are thick forests. There are no lights. The only thing we could see was the area directly in front of our headlights. I drive down the hill, cross the bridge, and uphill through more forest. It's as the highway starts to flatten out that it happens. Something sprints across the road so suddenly that I almost hit whatever it was. I slam on the brakes. I turn to my girlfriend and ask her if she saw it. She confirmed she had, but she couldn't make out what it was. Maybe it was a coyote, as they're a fairly common sight in the area. But something felt off about it. Whatever it was that ran in front of our car disappeared into the woods next to the road. Coyotes don't usually just dart out in front of cars. Not like that anyway. So for some reason, I decide to check it out. I turn the car around and switch on the high beams to better light up the forest in which this thing had vanished in. I step out of the car and walk towards the woods. I don't see anything. But now, it feels like perhaps I'd made a grave error. My heart is pounding, and the hairs on the back of my neck are standing at full attention. But I still don't see anything unusual in the trees. Suddenly, the car's horn blasts. It's not a short beep that you get if, say, your driver or passenger wanted you to hurry up and get in the car. No, this was a long, blaring drone of a beep, almost urgent. I walked back into the car and asked my girlfriend why she leaned on the horn like that. She said nothing. Instead, she pointed to a spot about 50 feet from where I was standing. I looked over in that direction, and that's when I saw it. Surely, this was the thing that ran in front of our car. It was a man. He was completely naked. His skin was covered in dirt and mud, and in one of his hands, he was holding a hatchet. He looked back at us, and then he smiled and waved to us, just before turning around and walking back into the forest. Needless to say, we got the hell out of there. Once we were safely driving again, my girlfriend explained what had just happened. While I was trying to look for the man in the area he initially vanished in, he circled back around and came out from another spot in the forest, beyond my car headlights. My girlfriend had seen something out the corner of her eye, and that's when she saw him. Before she honked the horn, he was walking towards me, his hatchet raised as if making to strike me. We called the authorities once we got safely back home. But they never found anyone, or they did and just didn't tell us. But the officer we spoke to explained his theory. The man was obviously looking to ambush unsuspecting lone travellers, for Lord only knows what reason. We all agreed that my girlfriend's quick thinking saved my life, as it let my potential killer know that I wasn't alone out there. I moved back into the area recently, so now I drive that highway often. No naked hatchet man sightings yet, but I can tell you, I'm definitely extra vigilant now, especially near Deep Creek. I'm 22, and this incident happened a year and a half ago. I'd just moved into my first apartment and was in the process of moving in. The door that led into my apartment locks itself automatically when closed. So I was going to the entrance of the apartment complex to get my mail while talking on the phone with my boyfriend. I returned to my apartment and sat on the bed while opening the mail while using the phone. I dropped the phone on the floor and it landed under the bed, so I had to lie on the floor and stretch for it. I saw something that caught my eye. There was someone under my bed. My eyes widened and I choked the urge to scream. The person under my bed was lying still, with his back towards me and his head to his chest, so I couldn't see his face. And he didn't see me. Trying to be rational while so many thoughts rushed through my head, I picked up the phone and said, "Sorry, I dropped my phone. I'm just going to take a shower and call you back." The bathroom's right by my bed, so I hastily walked in, quietly locked the door, turned the shower on, jumped out of my window, my apartment's on the first floor, and called the police. They told me to wait nearby, but to go across the street and see if anyone comes out of the door to the apartment complex. This was during summer, and it was still light out. I placed myself across the street, hiding behind a car while watching my open bathroom window and the entry door. I called my boyfriend, and he came to me just before the police. I gave them my keys, and they went inside. Only moments later, 2 cops came out, holding a thin and tired-looking man. His eyes looked crazy, but he didn't try to get away. The policeman that had stood beside me and comforted me while the police searched through my house, I was a mess, shivering and crying, told me that the man stood outside my bathroom door with one of my kitchen knives, waiting for me to come out. This man had somehow crept into my entry door while I was getting my mail and hid under the bed. The man that was trying to hurt me turned out to be a homeless person and was placed in a mental hospital. My boyfriend moved in with me the very next day. I just wanted to share my story so that others might know what to do if a situation like this occurs. The police told me that what I did was truly amazing and rational. If I'd screamed, this could have ended really badly for me.